Welcome back to the Bitcoin economy. We have Jeremy Sheridan here with us, Sean Ristow, my co-host. Jeremy has worked with us in the past, on a past team, that's where we know each other. So always awesome to connect with colleagues. We'll be at the Venetian next week, which is actually the first time I met Jeremy in person, was at the Venetian in Money 2020, 2023, I believe. And then now at FTI Consulting, you are leading digital asset group. The more important stuff and the stuff that I think is interesting for our listeners is obviously your long experience in the Secret Service. So would love to start off with honestly, like, how'd you go from a Tucson police officer into, working in the Secret Service, and then just take us into that?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Wonderful to be with you guys as always. I spent 25 years with the Secret Service. As you said, I started out in local law enforcement, put myself through school, and then started with the federal government. We are, of course, better known for the dark glasses and earpieces, and I did my share of that in my time with the Secret Service of doing protection. But the historical irony around the agency is that we were actually founded to conduct financial fraud investigations. At that time, it was counterfeit currency. President Lincoln's last official act as president was to sign the Secret Service into existence. He was assassinated later that day. But we were signed into existence for financial fraud investigations because counterfeit currency was a third of the currency in circulation at the time. And so our agency has maintained that legal authority, that congressional mandate to protect payment systems and to conduct these types of investigations. And that's what we have done throughout history. We have modernized with the adversary and, of course, are now heavily involved in digital asset, cryptocurrency, blockchain type investigations. Because of my age, I started doing credit card fraud, identity theft, identity fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, counterfeit, and those types of crimes. But towards the latter half of my career, I retired as the assistant director for the Office of Investigations. Was very focused on bringing the agency into the modern era as it relates to digital assets, cryptocurrency being used as means and method to execute criminal activity. So I stood up the agency's first illicit asset digital finance tracing teams and really leaned into pursuing additional resources, personnel, staffing, authorities related to that type of investigative work. Following my time there, as you mentioned, was with Prime Trust in the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs, dealing with similar considerations, less in an enforcement role, more in a regulatory and compliance role. And now at FTI Consulting, I've leveraged that experience both from the Secret Service, from the private sector, and I lead all things investigative in the digital asset and cryptocurrency space in the private sector. So everything from track and trace to valuation, platform assessment, compliance, regulatory reviews, asset recovery, and everything in between.
No, I mean, obviously, Jeremy, great to see you. And, I also had the pleasure of working with you at Prime Trust. Always been intrigued by, hear Secret Service, and I always think to myself, like, man, that'd be cool to do that job. And, and I it's probably one of those, like, when you get into it, it's probably not as cool as it looks on the outside, given all the stuff you have to deal with. But I mean, going into that, you were leading the Office of Investigation, and really the agent created the agency's first dedicated team, as you mentioned. How you kind of dove into it, but I'd love to hear more. How have the cybercrime tactics changed? What is it about digital assets that, what are they seeing the most, I would say, when it comes to the crime? And then the evolution of it, like, where do you see it going, as I would say technology continues to grow?
Yeah. So early in investigative days related to cryptocurrency, there was this misconception by, I think, many involved that it was a truly anonymous, fail-safe way for criminals to transfer value or send payments between each other.
Right.
Yeah. In some ways, ironically, that was very fortunate for law enforcement because, as we all know, that misconception is far from the truth, and it led to investigations, prosecutions, and consequence for some very significant cases. Secret Service being a part of them, but great credit to my colleagues in law enforcement across IRS, HSI, FBI, other agencies that are similarly and have similarly leaned into using the technology for evidentiary and investigative purposes. Downside of it is the adversary is always evolving and responding to areas where they are not successful and shifting to areas where they can be successful.
Right.
So to answer your question as to how it's evolved, the levels of sophistication that has come from those early days of, Bitcoin's untraceable and they'll never find me, to today's methods of anonymization and transaction authentication is happened very, very quickly. And the other side of it is there's a greater diversity of fraud that leverages the speed, value, and transaction advantages of digital assets and cryptocurrency. We worked a range of investigations, and this applies to everything from data breaches to pig butchering scams, NFT investment schemes, crypto theft, fraud, racketeering, even bankruptcy, right? Which isn't necessarily illicit, but certainly is a consequence and impact of that.
Yeah.
And when you pair that with the improved methods to hide identity through mixing cross-chain swaps, bridges, others, it makes it for a very effective means and method to execute crime, especially when the most damaging and highest volume, highest value incidents are supported by, or in some cases outright facilitated by, state level actors who have unlimited resources and are early adopters of technology. Makes it not only technically very challenging crime to investigate, but in terms of response, even administrative of freezing or seizing, to actual judicial action of consequence, geographically becomes very challenging. But that's not to say, I don't want to leave on the negative side. There have been similar responses, commensurate responses from the good guys, if you will, the law and those of us in private sector. And I think the way those responses have happened have been less of simply trying to keep pace and out technologically
Kind of stay ahead of them.
Yeah, right. It moves into a different realm in some senses. As I mentioned early in these investigations, they were really 100% focused on track and trace. And that's still continues to be very important. But a lot of what we're seeing in investigative space now is focus on other factors. For example, regulatory or compliance analysis that focuses not only on asset movement, but protocol deployment, company structure, as it relates to legal or regulatory environments, to determine if regulatory violations occurred, if there's a history of criminal activity, and forensically too, the analysis of these transactions that goes simply beyond blockchain forensics and goes to code level review for uncovering root cause analysis of security vulnerabilities and potential exploits for the purpose of attribution or digital fingerprinting or adversary identification, looking at walled analysis at a code-based level to understand who's involved, how they did it, which is another layer beyond blockchain surface transactions. And then I think the last piece of it on the response side is the valuation piece. Ultimately, and this may sound too superficial, but I think all investigations related to digital asset and cryptocurrency come down to some valuation determinations in some sense. And so understanding token design, function, as it relates to on-chain transaction volume in both centralized and decentralized environments from an investigative standpoint is extremely important for the determination and analysis.
Yeah.
Wow.
I guess bringing this to like very specific examples. So when you think of track and trace, going back to 2016, 2017, one of the first like bull runs where, a lot more users were onboarded. There's a lot of concerns around like Zcash and Monero and some of these privacy tokens, but I think mindshare wise, have significantly decreased in the conversation and what people, retail is talking about, what regulators are talking about. And that's like, tracing funds and large amounts of illicit activity is happening using these funds, but you really don't hear about it as much. But the emergence of, more human abilities around like pig butchering scams, which you mentioned, or recently there was that Coinbase hack where I believe it was a Coinbase support employee, that was compromised and then gave access, to hackers to have all of this PII. I guess in that evolution, like what are some things that you learned where your team had to be, hey, we need to shift away from just focusing on like Lazarus Group, using Monero to more like, how are they infiltrating Coinbase or a big exchange or BitGet or something to get PII or to get wallet addresses and new funds?
Yeah, I think you hit it spot on. It's still human vulnerability and human error.
Insider jobs and stuff.
Actually, we don't see a ton of that. That's, it's an element, and maybe that's semantics. It's insider jobs, reflective of kind of what Jody referred to, right? Third-party risk, or it's an insider because they have access, but they've been compromised or vulnerable. Not necessarily an insider from a conscious or malicious intent, but insider from a vulnerability sense. But there's 66% of these types of incidents are attributable to human error, human exploit, some type of compromise of human action, whether that's sophisticated phishing or social engineering. That's almost, the majority of time the attack vector, avenue of ingress that allows the compromise to occur.
Wow. Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, when I think of this, we've had a huge shift, obviously, in DC in the past few months. What has that done to the case level in what you're dealing with? And also, like, with the case level, I would assume that this is also going to open up you working with even additional, more customers of different other, I would say, backgrounds that you previously probably maybe never even touched.
Yeah, and it's a great question, and it's still a little early to tell.
Still evolving.
It's still evolving. I think you're exactly right. There are some significant shifts in approach at the federal level. You can start legislatively. That focus hasn't translated into law or policy yet. It's very close with the Genius Act, and there's certainly a lot of enthusiasm, momentum, support for it. Investigation or prosecution or criminal side, if you will, there's been a deprioritization from the federal level, starting with realignment of DOJ's NSET team, which is the primary DOJ federal in DC focus for these types of investigations and prosecutions. But there's also other scalebacks, withdrawals, or outright direction of not to pursue violations, for example, of the kleptocracy asset recovery initiative, which is the Justice Department effort to find, seize, and repatriate proceeds of foreign corruption. Similar actions have taken place around the Corrupt Practices Act, that there's been direction to halt enforcement of that. And what I think will happen, John, to your point, is states will start to fill that gap. Starting to already see that in some states.
Illinois,
California's responded with an unfair competition law. States are filing their own complaints for a securities violation. The Martin Act on the state level, in some ways, is a broader application of authority for securities violation that even affect government. So this is a longer process to see how it plays out. But I do think, Sean, as you said, there will be more public-private partnerships because of this. And I'm starting to see that in cases I'm handling with FTI, numerous cases where we partner with the Secret Service, the FBI, for exchange of information. Information doesn't necessarily flow to us because of the restrictions for obvious reasons, but we have been shoulder to shoulder with those agencies in numerous investigations to provide them our findings and analysis effort to leverage their authorities for the benefit of the entities we're partnered with, our clients, to conduct the investigations.
Jody, one quick question I want to ask. So how does it get divided? Like, I know you focus traditionally, Secret Service has been on banks and monetary, I would say more like, fiat type things. But then isn't there like Treasury Police? Isn't there other group, how does it get divided up?
So we like to call it overlapping lines of responsibility for a lot of beneficial reasons. One, there's no single point of failure. Two, you can leverage resources for the maximum benefit of identifying bad actors and bringing all resources to bear against them. Federal government agencies have limited budgets, or at least finite budgets, that individually can't combat the level of crime or illicit activity that's occurring. So we need a collective approach. There are distinctions within statutory authority for each agency, as you said, Sean. The Bureau is a very wide, high volume level of areas of focus. Because of that, they tend to focus more state level, more national security, counterterrorism, those types of cases. Not to say they don't focus on the other kind as well, but in terms of the distinction between them and the Secret Service for an investigation, as you said, Sean, the Secret Service, we consider ourselves, I'll say we as a legacy, but specialists and experts in that specific area of financial crime investigations. And I think that makes us extremely effective and, with understandable bias, the best in the world at those types of investigations, because that's all we do on the investigative front. But there are, similarly, I think the IRS does not get the credit they deserve in the investigative world in similar ways to the Secret Service. Their focus and...
Well, that's because everybody's got to pay the IRS.
Relationships aside, they are phenomenal investigators because of their understanding of the financial flow, transaction analysis. HSI, similarly, they are obviously pulled into other areas of focus and responsibility, but I think there's agencies out there that do phenomenal investigations that don't always get.
Yeah. But Jeremy, we asked you ahead of time, hey, what are some cases, that you can publicly talk through to make it really tangible? Like we talk about these concepts, but it's cool to hear, oh, hey, here's, problem, and the solution and how we reach that conclusion. So would love you to hit into those on what you can share. And then it kind of shows people, hey, here's the type of stuff that you're dealing with on a daily basis.
Yes. So I'll give you the two-pronged approach, a case from the Secret Service, as well as a case from FTI Consulting, because I think, to Sean's question a little earlier, there's a marriage there that's important. A lot of times when people are faced with some type of crisis or some type of investigation and in this area, they don't know where to turn, they don't know who to call. There's limitations what the federal government can provide. In private sectors, in FTI Consulting, we're able to bridge that gap, right? Our technology segment is a premier provider of digital insight, risk management solutions. We're a leading expert firm for firms facing crisis and transformation. And so we help with that governance, secure analysis to make sense of this information in a rapid sense. So I know the Secret Service is more bells and whistles, but I'm going to hope to tie that together. And so the first case as it relates to the Secret Service, and I have to restrict some information for obvious privacy, legal reasons in both instances, but you'll get the understanding concept of the case. And I think it really shows our capabilities. We were dealing with an individual who had made an investment into a liquidity mining. He, by nature of the contract, his funds were scheduled to be released at regular intervals over and through an unbonding process over a 2-week period is $1.2 million. After what had happened is, as I said earlier, social engineering, human error. He was scammed into providing his keys to someone who he thought worked on behalf of mining pool in some customer service or other support function. And so when the first unbonding event happened for the $50,000 was the first amount, it went to the scammer's address, which he immediately, of course, recognized was not his own. And he contacted us in the Secret Service.
Wow.
And so our approach, instead of going through, the mining pool website or some API, was to go at blockchain level analysis and actually insert a script, implement, design, and execute a script on the blockchain that would run prior to the mining rewards being posted to the website when the scammers would see it. So that worked for the second unbonding. We did it at an earlier block. And the second unbonding sent the funds to his address that we controlled, but the scammer saw that. And so it turned into this arms race. They deployed their own script earlier than ours, and the third unbonding we lost because their script executed it. And so we had to shift approach instead of, because we knew we had a 50-50 shot of our script processing the transaction, sending to our wallet versus theirs processing and sending to theirs. So we looked at how the gas fee structure worked for releasing these funds and prioritizing the transactions. But we knew that once we did that, the scammers would do the same thing and would just outbid us, if you will, by higher gas fees to get the transactions released to them. But we gave a head fake and we started pumping up gas fees related to this wallet and this account, hoping to lure them into that type of escalation process, and it worked. They kept hitting the account with higher gas fees with the intent of winning every other body after that. While they were doing that, we realized, and through analysis knew, that there were other tokens involved in the rewards process and the mining process that didn't rely on gas fees at all for the release and issuance of the rewards. So we transferred all of the victims' funds into those tokens immediately before the unbonding, so the gas fees didn't even matter. And while the scammers continued to, I think, focus on the gas fees as to why weren't they getting these unbondings, they didn't realize that the tokens were actually being moved off in an entirely separate token. And so we were able to recover $750,000 of the $1.2 million, which is still a significant loss, but we're very grateful to get that amount.
So you're actively going in, like, people are contacting you mid scam, right? Where, I mean, it's good on him to reach out and not just do it right?
Yeah, I think that really shows, the responsiveness, the resourcefulness, the ingenuity, and the technical capability of our teams in the Secret Service and in private sector. The second case mirrors that in similar fashion. The benefit, I think, of the second case example is it shows the diversity and variety of resources at FTI Consulting that we have to address an incident and bring all of these to bear, certainly starting with the blockchain and digital asset team. And in this case, it was an investment fund who had tens of millions of dollars in cryptocurrency investments and connected their wallet to what they thought was an airdrop from a DeFi protocol that ended up being completely fraudulent and a version of a rug pull. Yeah. But once they connected their wallet to it to receive the airdrop, the fraudulent protocol was able to siphon off tens of millions in assets from firm. And so what we did through our investigative teams at FTI, in partnership with the federal government, we were able to locate and flag all assets, We worked with government agencies because the distinction between public and private is the private sector doesn't have the authorities for subpoena or legal process that sometimes are necessary in the speed of these events. But we were able to identify the cause of the theft, advise on security compliance remediation, and not only that, but perform a look back on all digital asset activity prior to this to ensure we were securing assets. And we combined the on-chain and off-chain approach. On-chain, of course, analysis of all activity concerning the relevant addresses, trace the addresses. We were pinpointing exchanges that had KYC compliance measures in place for the purpose of those subpoenas. Did research into every person involved in this, looked at the DeFi protocol down to the code level itself to try and identify similar applications of this exploit in other areas. We even did digital forensic examination of user devices and system software, alerts set up on all funds, monitored all funds, moved other assets into secure locations.
Wow.
And conducted interviews of everyone involved in this. We reviewed even the IT service providers' oversight. Heavy information.
How long did this take?
It's been years. It's a long.
And these people they had no clue that you were onto them.
So they didn't initially. The success of this is they haven't off-ramped any of the funds, and we're continuing to pursue them. And we have conducted outreach for negotiation purposes to the actors on chain.
So this is still ongoing.
Yeah, we have. We minted an NFT to send a message to them to do negotiations. And, I think because of our involvement, they are aware that there is heavy law enforcement and private sector monitoring presence on the assets. And they are reluctant to move them because of the level of scrutiny that's being put onto these. We're able to move as quickly as we were to locate and flag all of them. And we've also, because of these actions, assisted the Secret Service and the DOJ in identifying over 12 additional rug pulls using similar methodology because of the review of the protocol's approach. And we're, generating evidentiary information for prosecution.
Wow. That's incredible. That's pretty cool to see kind of flipping the script.
Because... Yeah, it's funny. When I left the government, I had a colleague who said, you're leaving a career, you'll never have another career, you only have other jobs. And I'm very grateful that I've been able to prove them wrong by working for a firm like FTI that, it'll sound totally Boy Scoutish and corny, but we're finding evidentiary ground truth to assist in these types of investigations, to make people whole, to bring consequence to bad people doing bad things to good people. I know that sounds totally Boy Scoutish.
No, you see it I think it's good. People have this, to what you said earlier, people have this, I would say, fallacy that, I'm going to use crypto and I'm not going to be tracked. First of all, if you're using Bitcoin to do illicit things, you're not really the sharpest knife in the drawer, because you could use all the different addresses that you want to route it through. There's still a log called the blockchain, which is tracking everything. But I don't know, I think it's gotten worse. I probably get, I don't know, 5, 6 calls a day now of people trying to do.
Specifically.
Oh, I get at least 5 of those a day now. The text coin 0.
Oh.
And then
it's driven by value. Anything of value will attract illicit activity. And as the values increase, so does the draw.
It's only going to get worse.
Yes. And I think it's the double-edged sword of, when we started in this however many years ago, right? It was not greatly understood. It was technically very complex. It still is. But conceptually, it was this idea that people couldn't grasp, didn't want to be a part of, didn't want to enter into the market. And now you look at and this is even before there's wide-scale retail use or regulatory frameworks or legal federal process in place. But you look at just the volume of market entrants or users of cryptocurrency, investors, it's such a high volume, such a high value that is going to attract more opportunities, more vulnerabilities, more illicit actors looking to target it. And unfortunately, as the information around it and the visibility around it, you're still going to bring market entrants who are not well versed, are not cautious enough, are solely seeking this value return without taking the necessary precautions, and are more easily taken advantage of through manipulation or lack of controls over their own assets.
What do you recommend? Like, you're, deep in the weeds. What do you tell people besides the obvious of like, don't be effectively stupid and be like, oh, someone calls you and asks you for your password and your 2FA. You think you should give it to them? But no, what do you recommend to people, like, when it comes to how to protect yourself from a lot of this?
So I'm a child of the 80s. It might be a really bad 80s quote from a really bad 80s movie, Tango and Cash, which is DTA, right? Don't trust anybody. And I don't mean that like the industry or the technology can't be trusted. But what I mean is, if you are entering into investment or a transaction or providing information, don't trust anybody other than your own instincts, your own gut, and your own research. As you said, there's 1,000 do's and don'ts you can find online with any search.
Mm-hmm.
I think ultimately a large number of the incidents we're seeing are from focus on offers that are too good to be true and blind pursuit of value or profit over what your gut is telling you is not a secure transaction or a secure exchange of information.
Yeah. Jeremy, honestly, really appreciate you jumping on. It's always good to reconnect. But as our focus is shifting even more to the education side of different forms of custody, we're looking at like going from just like self custody into like multi-institution custody, as well as what parties do you trust when you start lending, or wanting to borrow against your assets and or like get some type of yield. These are all like going to be topics that we're going to be diving into, and that people need to really learn how to do the due diligence on. And then also hearing examples of how other people have lost money is very helpful, so they don't make that own mistake. So we'd love to have you back. Always good to have an expert opinion. And thanks for joining the show.
Thank you, guys. Great to be with you.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Be well.